Okay, so I think the way to kick off this video is to say that behind me is not my entire collection of books, but the books that are most important to me. And I have in my hands here all the books relating to writing as a practice, how to improve at writing, or anything nonfiction about writing. That amounts to 5 books. And the real reason is, to be honest, even though I've been on this writing journey for almost 20 years or longer than that now, really, is that you need to be careful about whose advice you buy. The reason that I've kind of showed you at the start there, these 2 books, is because I want to kind of draw a comparison between books about writing that I think are good and books about writing that I think aren't really worth the paper they're written on. But why do I only have 5 books on writing? The real reason is I followed the advice of this book, in which you'll find that King basically says, if you want to get better at writing, you need to write a lot and you need to read a lot. That's a fundamental message. And I'll go more into the details of why I think this is such a great read, even though I'm not particularly into books on writing generally. But the crux of the reason, really, more so than just King's advice, is that when I sit down and read a book about writing, I very rarely get any kind of takeaway from that book that I really feel is going to improve my writing more than sitting down to write or to read would. But the reason that I love this book so much is because it's not just about King's advice. He's not trying to outlay, these are all the things that you should do to be a great writer. He tries to tell a story as he's doing it, which I think is a reflection of why he's such a natural at what he does and why he's done it so well for so long and so persistently. Because he couldn't write a book about writing without turning it into a kind of story in its own right. He goes into detail about his life in Maine and his accident that he got into, his struggles with addiction also, I think, if I remember rightly, are in here. And also, I think more importantly for a writer's perspective, he details his mental compartmentalization of handling early years of rejection and also early years of trying to be an artist at a time in his life when he was still experiencing quite a bit of poverty. Even that side of it itself is fascinating and I think worth reading, particularly the way that it tries to brace you for resilience in the rejection process. The other reason I think this is so good is because every piece of writing advice in here is practical. And also, even though I haven't read this book in a number of years, I can still remember the things that it taught me I still use to this day because they're so simple to memorize. And that's really what's, I think, important about a writing book in general, is that you can sit down and read a book about writing, and if you're in the moment and you're actually typing away, you probably aren't going to remember a lot of it. But if it's easy and quick, that makes it a lot more ready in your mind when you're actually sitting down at the keyboard. The 2 pieces of advice in here that I really took away as absolute staples I still use to this day when I'm actually writing. The first one was, the road to hell is paved with adverbs. Don't rely on descriptors to bear all the weight of the emotion that you're trying to convey. Let the structure of your dialogue or the tone that you're setting do that for you. One example here might be, "I hate you," she said angrily, is just a poor way of conveying that emotion. It's almost a tautology, because saying "I hate you," we know what the character's trying to convey. And there is an inherent anger behind that. And also, you need to leave a little bit of mystery behind. When you use adverbs to isolate a character's emotion, you're giving your hand away. You're not letting the character speak for themselves. You're kind of telling the reader what this character feels without getting to feel it yourself. That's just my take. The other piece of advice that I always remember from this book was, whatever you write, when you go back and edit, cut about 10% of what you wrote. I remember reading that for the first time and thinking, well, that's just King and his way of working. That's not going to be relevant to me personally. And funnily enough, I think there's mathematics there. I don't really know why. I don't understand how the magic of that works. But for some reason, when you go back over a draft that you've written and you cut about 10%, maybe more if you can, just wherever you think that you've over-explained, because I think his point is that we tend to over-explain things in the moment. We don't think that someone's going to get it. When you read it back yourself, you realize actually what I'm trying to say is being conveyed. I forget the George Orwell quote, but I remember him basically saying that conveying what you want to say using the shortest number of words possible is generally the best writing. And for a long time, I didn't believe that, actually. I was convinced that that wasn't true. And then I think after I spent a long time letting go of my belief that as much description as possible will convey exactly what I mean. The main reason being that, yeah, you could be more precise, but it's going to be boring for the reader. So yeah, On Writing has some really useful practical advice for any fiction that you might write. And also, it's just a really engaging read because King makes it a bit of a memoir of his life and his early struggles in writing. So, the other book in my thumbnail. This was a Christmas gift. I didn't buy this for myself. Now, I'm going to open this by saying I don't think this is useless. This is not a useless book, but it certainly didn't help me. And I want to go through the reasons why I think anyone should be careful about the kinds of books that they buy when it comes to getting advice on writing. I really struggled with this. The caution I would put on anyone buying a book like this is that Darian Smith, I did a little bit of research on this guy. He is someone who writes fiction and also has a degree in psychology. So he's essentially married up his two interests into a book that is supposed to be practical. But also, I think fundamentally, there's a lot of stuff in here that when you actually come to sit at the keyboard isn't really going to be particularly useful. One of the issues that I think you have with a book like this, with King's book, it was filled with practical advice that you could use for pretty much any type of fiction from someone who's been doing it for a living for a very long time. In comparison, this kind of book relies on types of psychology that are only going to be relevant to particular stories. I think Smith has tried to make an effort to make it relatable to as much work as possible. I give him credit for that. I was thinking about this in relation to my upcoming novel, which is going to be published next year. And unfortunately, a lot of what he's written here isn't relevant to my story at all. For example, he has a whole chapter about the psychology of how our parents influence our lives. And in my novel, the characters' parents don't really come into it. They're older and their parents, some of them have moved on, some of them have died. I've certainly read and loved books where characters have been heavily influenced by their parents, and the parents are themselves characters in it. For example, The Corrections by Jonathan Franzen. But a lot of this stuff is still kind of baseline. There's a chapter in here called All's Fair in Love and War about the different ways that people express and feel love on a psychological level, but also in the conflict of a story, for example. And I think this was one of the areas where I really started to struggle with the content of the book. He tries to explain that from a psychological theory point of view, there are many different types of love languages that someone might have, like words, acts of service, touch or physical affection, gifts, and quality time. These are all true. Of course, all of us will have relationships where we have these different types of language with other people, but he gives you the kind of pieces that you might need to use, but also doesn't really give you a particular way of connecting them up. Sometimes he'll give you an example from a piece of classic fiction, and that's fine, but it's usually pretty brief and doesn't go into any further detail than that. So, this is part of the reason why I've avoided books like this in the past. I think I've always had a kind of an inherent feeling that I would never learn very much from them, or wouldn't learn anything from them that wouldn't be better discovered by just writing something that I felt needed to be written. And I will say, if someone is just starting out, they've really not been writing for very long, they might have a totally different opinion on this. But from my perspective, even now, I think there's more value in something like King. A couple of bonus things that I wanted to share. I got this for Christmas as well. This is The Writer's Block. Tell a story that begins with this discovery of a ransom note. It's mostly writing prompts and things like that. There's a few little tidbits in here, little anecdotes about authors, the kind of links that certain classical books have with popular themes. One of the things I really like about it is it does try to connect more classic fiction with some contemporary examples as well, which is cool. It's nice for a little distraction. it's not particularly useful for getting better at writing, but it's a novelty, and this is mostly going to be my favorite paperweight, to be honest. But a favorite paperweight nonetheless. One little honorable mention I wanted to include just at the end here as well. If you're looking at a writing book that is focused primarily on the structure of the way that you might use syntax and grammar, the Elements of Style is very old, but really reliable, and it's like super short as well. It's not going to waste your time. I think this was published in, oh wow, it's actually way older than I ever imagined. It's 1959. This book is older than my dad. I think I was on a subreddit about writing, and someone recommended this just deep in the comments, and I thought, okay, I'll give that a go, and I thought it was really useful. I think just as a closing point, because I'd feel a level of guilt if I didn't mention this also, I don't want to disparage Darren Smith, the author, just because this didn't work for me. I think it is his, from what I can see on Amazon, I think it is his most popular book. He has won prizes for his short stories, according to his bio. I'm taking that at face value because I've not read any of his work, but to me, by my research, it didn't look like he sold an awful lot of his fiction. But this proved to be a really popular buy on Amazon. It could be a case that he saw a gap in the market and actually placed this really well, even though I don't think it's something that I'd recommend personally. So yeah, I guess maybe final point is if you are specifically looking for something that relates writing to psychological theory, you probably like this, but not really for me.